New Washington head coach Danny Sprinkle did not want the smoke of Spokane, opting not to play the Zags this year and giving Mark Few another non-conference game to schedule.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Monday and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right, there is something for everybody every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Well, folks, it is a Mailbag Monday edition of Locked On Zags. We're going to talk about a handful of questions folks asked in the second and the third segment of today's show, but we are leading the topic at hand. The Washington Huskies have opted out of the non-conference game that was to be played this year at the McCarthy Athletic Center. Here's the situation. It was reported at first by John Rothstein of CBS Sports. Jim Meehan of the Spokesman Review wrote a full article about it. He got some quotes from Gonzaga's athletic director, Chris Standiford, which helped kind of iron out some of the details. When it was first reported that this series was canceled, it was unclear which side had opted to cancel the series. There is confirmation now, again, from Meehan's reporting, talking to Chris Standiford, that it was canceled on the Washington side. Chris Standiford, the AD, did not indicate that he knows why Washington chose not to do the game. We will read a quote from him later, but the situation effectively is this. Washington and Gonzaga have had a kind of standing home and home series for the last decade-ish, since it had been canceled for a long time prior to that. The game was canceled in the 21-22 season because of COVID. The series was then extended through the 25-26 season. So while it's been going on consistently for, I think, 7-8 years now or so, they still had to re-up it every couple of years. They would kind of agree to, hey, we're going to do it for another 2 years. We're going to do it for another 4 years, whatever it may be. So after the 21-22 cancellation, the series was extended through 2025-26. So this season and next season. But there was an opt-out clause in the contract that stated for any coaching change, either side could then choose to cancel playing the series going forward. So once we got the word that this series was canceled, again, either side could have made the decision to cancel the series. We knew that as soon as Mike Hopkins was fired from the University of Washington. He'd been there for a very long time. Of course, the former longtime assistant for Syracuse. He's now in the NBA and is assistant coach, I believe, with the Phoenix Suns. UW hired Danny Sprinkle, the former Utah State head coach, previously the former Montana State head coach. He'd been at Montana State for a couple of years, took them to, I believe, back-to-back NCAA tournaments, took over at Utah State. Utah State was expected to finish 9th in the Mountain West last year with Danny Sprinkle at the helm. They instead won the regular season, got an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament. Sprinkle parlayed that into getting this job at Washington as they head into the Big Ten. But because Washington, in theory, again, we don't know the exact reasoning, but because they had an extended conference schedule, they're going to join the Big Ten. They're going to play a lot of conference games. This is something that Mark Few has mentioned as a concern, that other coaches have mentioned as a concern. It's the reason that a lot of MTEs, instead of being 3 games and across 3 days, are now 8 teams total, two total games per team across just 2 days, because a lot of the MTEs are not attracting the marquee teams if you have to commit 3 of your non-conference games. That's something we're starting to see happen more and more. Again, here's the quote from Chris Standiford that I'm pulling from this article written by Jim Meehan of the Spokesman Review. Standiford said, "It makes sense to me with a new coach going into a new league and scheduling philosophies," said Standiford, stressing he did not know the specific reasons for UW's decision. Quote, "Hopefully we can do something again in the near future." Worth acknowledging that Washington did, of course, beat Gonzaga last year in Seattle. It was Gonzaga had an 11-point lead. They blew it down the stretch. It was that during that really stressful part of the season, late November, early December, really through the end of December, when Gonzaga finally started to kind of kick it into gear into conference play. They had that ugly loss to Santa Clara and then really righted the ship after that, went on a tear down the stretch of that season and obviously ended up back in the Sweet 16. We all know the rest of that story here, but the loss to Washington was one of the worst results for Gonzaga of the season. Washington didn't particularly fare all that well after that. It was a tough loss for Gonzaga. We saw the fatigue in the guards, et cetera, et cetera. Gonzaga had won 14, won 14 of 15 against Washington, including that loss, of course. So they'd won the previous 14 matchups. This has not been a competitive game. It hasn't been. There have been competitive competitions. Rui Hachimura hitting that game winner stands out to me as a particularly big one. That is in Seattle, a tremendous shot by him. But for the most part, I think Gonzaga's won 5 or 6 of these games by double digits. The previous competition before the loss this last year was a 17-point victory for the Zags. It hasn't been super competitive. So for Washington, they are getting rid of a game against a team that is projected by most to be a top 5 team when the season rolls around in this Gonzaga team. Whether they actually end up top 5, stay top 5, etc., who knows? But at the end of the day, Washington walked away from an opportunity to play a true road game against a top 5 team. Part of that is because they don't need that kind of game. And that's, I think, where the frustration comes from. They don't need to play Gonzaga to boost their resume because they're going to play so many teams in the Big Ten. They're going to play, I think it's a 20-game conference schedule for the Big Ten. I apologize if that's incorrect. I believe that's what it is. And they're going to get Michigan State, and they're going to get Ohio State, and they're going to get a Michigan team that's going to be much improved under Dusty May, and Wisconsin and Illinois, and the list goes on and on and on, as well as Oregon, UCLA, and USC as well. And so for them, they don't need to schedule a game like this, and they're choosing not to. I'm going to read it as there's no reason. It doesn't do us any good to go to Spokane and lose. And Washington fans can be mad and say, well, we won last year. Yeah, sure. I'm not trying to take away last year's win. But this Gonzaga team is the same with some improvements in certain areas. And this Washington roster, I don't think is as good. Maybe I'll be wrong. I think Great Osobor is fantastic. And I think he's a great addition for this team. I'm very excited to see what Zoom Diallo can bring to this program. There's other guys that I'm excited about coming into this program. Tyler Harris is one that comes to mind, Makai Mason, et cetera, et cetera. But this team was really good last year with so much veteran experience in Severe Wheeler and Keon Brooks and Paul Mulcahy and Moses Wood. This year's team, all those guys are gone. A lot younger, a new coach. I don't think they would fare well going to Spokane to play a very veteran, experienced Gonzaga team. And I think they opted out of this game because it doesn't serve them well to go to Spokane and lose. It doesn't really hurt them, but there's not much gain from it either. There's a lot to gain from it if they go win. I don't think they feel that confident that they're going to go do that. Flipping the script, talking about what it means from the Gonzaga side. Gonzaga still got great marquee games on their schedule already. They're playing Kentucky in Seattle at the Climate Pledge Arena. They're playing UConn at the Madison Square Garden. They're playing UCLA at the Intuit Dome in LA. They're playing San Diego State on the road. They're also playing 3 games in the Battle for Atlantis. Their 3 opponents will be some combination of Arizona, Indiana, Providence, Louisville, Oklahoma, West Virginia, and Davidson. They have 7 great games on their schedule. With apologies to Davidson, if they end up getting matched with them, it's probably more like 6 good games on the schedule, but they already have a great non-conference schedule, and now they have 1 more game to play with. For those of you who are longtime listeners to the show, you know that I have kind of divided Gonzaga's non-conference schedule into 3 distinct parts. I call them marquee games, mid-level games, and bye games. And we've seen those mid-level games kind of go away. Last year, if I'm not mistaken, all of their non-conference games were either top 30 teams per KenPom or teams outside of the top 220 at KenPom, except for 2. Every non-conference game was either top 30 or outside the top 220, except for 2 games. It was Yale, their home opener, and Washington. So in theory, if they're looking to replace with a similar game, this would be one of their kind of mid-level games, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that's necessarily how they're going to treat it. They also have less non-conference games to work with this year, so they may have less bye games than typical. They may not have that NAIA game against an Eastern Oregon. I think a lot of Gonzaga fans would be happy to see that be the game that gets replaced as opposed to losing a marquee game. I'm not super concerned about losing a marquee game because I think they already have plenty of them on the schedule. I'd like to see more. I'd like to see at least 1 more good team added. I'd love to see like Tennessee has been rumored. I know Mark Few and Rick Barnes have a good relationship. That'd be fantastic. Bring on Tennessee. I am all 100% on board with that. Baylor would be great. BYU would be great. Texas, Ole Miss, Florida. Gonzaga's had connections to either those coaches or those programs in the past. Bring any of those on. But more than likely, I think we're going to see like one or two more good mid-major teams, and then your bye games. You're going to get your Bakersfields, your Texas State, whoever it may be in the SWAC conference, Mississippi Valley State, Jackson State, etc. And then I'm hoping you get like a Yale, a team that won a game in the NCAA tournament last year. Those tops right around top 75 in KenPom. Get a team like Yale. Get a team like Kent State. Get a team like McNeese. If Will Wade wants to go through that again, probably doesn't. Get a team like New Mexico out of the Mountain West or Nevada. Get somebody like that. If you can't get a Tennessee, if you can't get a Baylor, or get one of each and then have bye games after that, that would be great. There's still a lot of options out there. A lot of teams are getting close to finalizing their schedule, but a lot of the good teams, a lot of the teams that Gonzaga may face still haven't finalized that schedule. So there's a lot of room for Gonzaga to potentially add to this schedule, even after losing the opportunity to play Washington. Well, folks, we're going to talk about the future of the WCC and whether there is an opportunity for the conference to be a 4-bid league, and if they could potentially get involved with the Pac-12 Mountain West potential realignment situations there. We got more on those two things coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, LinkedIn Jobs. Folks, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right people for your team faster, and they do it for free. And LinkedIn is not just another generic job board. They have the tools to help you hire professionals that you cannot find anywhere else, and even those who are not actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. And in a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users do not visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, folks, you're not looking in the right place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. So hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also trying to constantly find ways to make this process even easier, including launching a feature that helps you write your own job descriptions, which makes that process not only easier, but quicker as well. So post your job for free right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, folks, segment 2, still your patents, still Locked On Zags podcast. We got 4 mailbag questions to get to between this segment and the final segment. I didn't want to mention this. I had it in my notes for segment 1, but we were running out of time. Jalen Harrelson, 5-star prospect in the 2025 class, one of the 3 guards Gonzaga is known to be pursuing in that class, alongside Davis Fogel from Anacortes, alongside Isaiah Harwell from Idaho. Jalen Harrelson scheduled some visits. Gonzaga is not among them. We have, if you've listened to the show a handful of times over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about Jalen Harrelson. We've continually said that he seems unlikely to end up in Spokane. He's from Indiana. Most of the schools he's interested in are in the Indiana area. It never felt super likely. This doesn't mean he won't schedule a visit to Gonzaga. He still could, but he chose to schedule a visit to Indiana in August, a visit to Notre Dame in September, a visit to Michigan State also in September. He's already visited Auburn. The rest of his list includes that Gonzaga. It also includes Duke, Missouri, Purdue, and Kansas. I feel like Gonzaga is on the list, and I feel like there is genuine interest on Gonzaga's side. And I don't want to say that Harrelson is completely uninterested in Gonzaga. I just don't think they're super high on his list. And I'm not if he doesn't make it out to Spokane, we're not going to be spending a lot of time even watching his announcement, because it's not going to be to Gonzaga. If he does come out to Spokane, certainly that's going to raise the interest level. But at this point, the continued expectation that he is among Gonzaga's 4 targets, 3 of them all feel fairly likely, or at least there's a good chance that Gonzaga lands all 3 of them, or at least 2 out of those 3. Harrelson has always felt like the outlier, and this kind of helps confirm that. Anyway, on to our 2 questions here in this segment. The first one comes from Austin via Discord. Austin says, with the WCC having 4 new members in the 25-26 season, do you think it is possible to have 4 teams make the NCAA tournament? I know it might be a stretch, but is it possible? Yes, the 25, so not this upcoming season. This upcoming season, Washington State and Oregon State will be in the conference. The following year, they will also be in the conference, as well as Grand Canyon and Seattle U. Here's the thing. Projecting anything in college basketball outside of the upcoming season in this era is impossible. Washington State's entire roster from last year to this year is different. Every single player is gone. They're not the only team. Oregon State, most of their team's gone. Portland, most of their team is gone. By the time Grand Canyon and Seattle, you get into the conference, it's going to look completely different. Completely different. That, combined with the fact that Gonzaga, we don't know how many conference games they're going to play. in 25-26. My guess is they're going to stay at 18. But what we're going to see, and what we're already seeing, and it was a big part of the conversation previously with Washington, is the high major teams are going to schedule fewer teams like this. I think the WCC and like good mid-major conferences are really going to struggle to schedule the kind of games that they need to schedule. And I think that the WCC teams, like who's going to schedule Grand Canyon? They've worked really hard to put together a good schedule, but who's going to continue to schedule them? I don't see it continuing to happen. And I think that those kind of teams, Grand Canyon, Washington State, as well as San Francisco, Santa Clara, LMU, et cetera, they're going to struggle to get the kind of games on their non-conference schedule that they're going to need. They're going to have better games in conference play. A team like Santa Clara and San Francisco and those getting 2 cracks at Grand Canyon, getting 2 cracks at Wazoo, as well as 2 cracks at each Gonzaga and St. Mary's, that helps a lot. But to get 4 teams into the tournament, a couple of those teams are going to need to have really strong non-conference schedules. And I just don't see it happening. So without being with the caveat that projecting anything outside of the upcoming season is impossible in college basketball these days, I think it's very unlikely. I think 3 is possible, maybe even probable. We'll say possible. Let's stick with possible. But 4 seems very, very difficult to project at this point. Next question here comes from Jeff via Gmail. Jeff says, there seems to be a growing possibility that instead of a complete merger between the Pac-12 and Mountain West, the Pac-12 may raid the Mountain West for 5 or 6 schools, even though it would cost the conference about $80 million to do so. That could potentially leave schools like Utah State, New Mexico, Nevada, and Wyoming having to scramble to figure things out. With that in mind, the WCC has a history of being able to get schools to separate their football programs from all other sports and join with the conference. Would or should the WCC move to add those programs, and would or should Gonzaga be in favor of such a move? Okay, so I think the premise, I'm good with the premise. You're absolutely right. We've seen this conversation that the Pac-12, the Pac-2, in this case, Oregon State and Washington State, are instead of reverse merging with the Mountain West, where they would just consume the entire Mountain West Conference, rebrand it as the Pac-12 and move forward. It seems like they're moving in a direction of trying to have the Pac-12 become the Pac-8 and just take 6 of those Mountain West schools. Boise State, UNLV, San Diego State, etc. And like you said, it's going to leave a few programs out. And I think the programs you listed are likely programs that would be left out. Nevada, Utah State, New Mexico, etc. The premise continuing that the WCC has added programs who have football in the past is obviously true. We saw that with Wazoo and Oregon State. We, of course, saw that with BYU previously. But I'm not super buying into the idea that because they've done it before, they're going to just be able to do it again. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And yes, it has worked in the past, but Washington State and Oregon State are they're not here for a long term. They don't want to be here for a long time. They're content being here for 2 years. It's kind of a relationship that works positively for both sides at this point, but I don't think football schools really want to join the WCC. I'm not sure what other options these programs are going to have. And that's where I think I'll say this, the WCC absolutely should and will call these programs. If this happens as the way it's laid out in this question, if Utah State, New Mexico, and Nevada are like, we're just hung out to dry, our conference got gutted, we don't have enough to build our own conference, they're probably going to start by trying to do that, trying to grab North Dakota, South Dakota State from the Summit League, bring them in and rebuild the Mountain West without their top teams. That's probably their top option. But Stu Jackson's going to be on the phone, and he should be on the phone. And if they can make this work and they can bring those teams in, that builds a nice basketball conference. Utah State, New Mexico, Nevada, they were tournament teams last year. Good tournament teams, well-coached teams. Well, Utah State obviously has a new coach now, but to answer the Gonzaga side of this, there's not a chance that Mark Few wants this to happen. 0.0% chance. How Gonzaga as a university votes, I don't know. I'm less confident about that. No chance Mark Few wants this. He spoke with borderline disdain about Washington State and Oregon State joining the conference in a recent press conference. He made it clear that that's not something he was super interested in. And while you could say, well, Nevada, those teams are better basketball conferences, not really. Better basketball schools. Yeah, I mean, yes, they probably are, but it's such a minute difference. Mark Few doesn't want more conference games. He doesn't want more conference teams. What we're seeing is the WCC effectively no longer bending at the knee for Mark Few and Gonzaga. And this makes sense. It's logical that the WCC is no longer doing that because Gonzaga is not hiding that they want to realign. And I think I'm assuming Stu Jackson and the leadership of the WCC get it. They understand why Gonzaga is like, we are hell-bent on getting somewhere else. But why would the conference continue to placate them? They don't have to do that. The WCC's goal right now is to survive. And survival involves grabbing programs like Grand Canyon and Seattle U. It involves heavily calling the phone if Utah State and New Mexico and Wyoming and Nevada become available. You call them and you do everything you can to get them in your conference. What Gonzaga says, be damned. Like, that has to be the mentality for the WCC. Because if you do what Gonzaga wants and then they leave anyway, you cost yourself opportunities to sustain your program, to sustain your brand, your conference. That doesn't make any sense. So to answer the two questions, should the WCC and will the WCC pursue these programs if they end up getting left out in the cold? Yes. Should Gonzaga support it? I don't know. I don't know exactly whether Gonzaga should support it, but I know that they will not. I know that Mark Few and the basketball program will not support expanding the conference, even with programs that are pretty quality like those Mountain West ones. Well, folks, third final segment coming up. We got Gonzaga has a lot of scoring on the wing position. Michael Ajayi, Caleb Battle, really good scorers outside. And we're going to talk about whether that could potentially lead to different offensive sets this upcoming season. All that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, the NBA and NHL seasons are winding down. NBA is already done. But folks, baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And if you're looking ahead to the 2025 odds, Gonzaga right now plus 2,000 to win it all in 2025. It's already dropped. If you want to maximize your chances of winning some money and watching the Zags cut down the nets, then what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and make sure your first bet is an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast. We're still going through Mailbag Monday here. It's a big week for Locked On Zags and for just college basketball, Gonzaga basketball. We got the NBA draft coming up on Wednesday and Thursday. We're going to talk about Anton Watson, where we think he'll go, then where he does go, what that means for him, all that stuff coming up later this week. For right now, though, capping off Mailbag with a couple of questions here. This one comes from Pete22909 on Discord, who says, Gonzaga has been blessed historically with having talented big men. You can say that again, Pete. He goes on. Accordingly, Mark Few has prioritized using the high pick and roll and feeding the post as the mainstay of the team's offense. Given the scoring firepower that Michael Ajayi and Caleb Battle will bring to the wings, do you think that we will see some tweaks to the offensive scheme to incorporate these weapons? If so, what types of new actions might we see? It's a fantastic question, Pete. Love it. Yes, we will see new things, mostly because you're always doing new things. There's always going to be adjustments. There's always going to be tweaks. I think some seasons, there's probably less tweaks than other seasons. It's personnel dependent. It's schedule. It's team by team who you're playing dependent. And in this specific offseason, Mark Few's not going to be around the team as much as he typically would be because he's going to be in Paris with the Olympic team. But I think ultimately there will be tweaks. There will be adjustments that Gonzaga makes to the offense. The nice thing is having, key returners at the point guard position, at the center position, I think helps them feel like the base level of the offense. They can just kind of let that be because Nembhard and Graham and Nolan and all those guys really figured it out in the second half of the season. So it's like, okay, all that's going to still be in. All those packages are still there. Let's find some things we can add, some things we can tweak. Last year, the end of shot clock situations kind of went to Anton Watson. They need to find somebody new for that role who's going to be hey, just put the ball on the deck and go get a bucket. Like there are just specific actions that they need to change because of personnel departures. Regarding Ajayi and Battle, yes. I'm not sure exactly what the specific plays are going to look like, whether it's pin downs, whether it's backdoor cuts, whether it's side to side ball screen actions, whether they do the high-low with Michael Ajayi, which is something I think they could do because we saw Anton Watson run it a lot last year. I think Ben Gregg's capable of it, but maybe they'll put Michael in that role. That gives him a little bit of freedom to look for the pass. If it's not there, potentially put the ball on the deck, which is not something that Ben was necessarily going to do. It isn't really in his skill set at this point. Battle is elite at getting to the free throw line. And I think you're going to run actions that get him the ball going downhill. Getting him the basketball in a situation where he can dribble it once or twice and get into the paint You have to do that. You have to find ways to do that. That can't just be things broke down. Let's get the ball to Battle and let them go to work. You have to have specific design plays, whether they're blobs, whether they're actual offensive sets, whether it's just, hey, this is an adaptation off of the motion offense where, if a defender's overplaying, we do a backdoor cut, we look to get you the ball there. There has to be sets for that because Battle it's a tremendous skill set of his, getting to the free throw line and being able to convert. And Mark Few mentioned it specifically when asked about Caleb Battle at a press conference last week, specifically mentioned his rate at getting to the free throw line. It's something he's aware of. It's something the staff's aware of. They're going to find ways to do it. I mentioned backdoor cutting. I think that's going to be something we see more of because I think the personnel is aligned well for it. Battle and Ajayi are not like knockdown elite three-point shooters, and I don't think they'll be scouted as such. But Steel Ventures is. And both Ajayi and Battle can make threes. And so I think what we're going to see in the offense, I think we're going to see a lot of defenses overplay. They're going to be really, really trying to take away the three-point shot. In those situations, utilizing that backdoor cut. Maybe that means working with the bigs to be more aware of when that might happen and how to look for it. Graham Ike is not a great passing big. Gonzaga's historically had great passing bigs. Drew Timme, Shemek Karnowski, Domantas Sabonis, et cetera, et cetera. Graham is not that. So if you want to operate the offense through him, you have to figure out how to either A, get him better at making those reads or finding other ways to kind of incorporate some of that stuff. I know it's kind of a non-answer to the question, but if you're going to be looking for new offensive sets based on Ajayi and Battle skills, like you're going to see them. I promise you're going to see them. Exactly what they look like, I don't know. And if I did, I'm not sure I would tell you all anyway, because who knows who's listening to the show. But I would expect to see some new things specifically catered to those guys' skill sets. Final question of the show comes from Austin via Discord. Austin says, Gonzaga has had two teams make it to the national championship. If those two teams went head-to-head, who is taking home the trophy? What is the score? And then he says, with those two national title team rosters, you must build a one-team juggernaut. Which players make the cut? Yeah, this was a fun and difficult exercise to discuss. Quick rundown on the rosters. I just picked kind of the rotation pieces. 2016-17, your starting lineup was Shemek Karnowski, Jonathan Williams, Jordan Matthews, Nigel Williams-Goss, and Josh Perkins. Your bench was Zach Collins, Silas Melson, Killian Tilly, and then Brian Alberts pseudo in the rotation. 2020-21, your starting lineup, Drew Timme, Corey Kispert, Joel Ajayi, Andrew Nembhard, and Jalen Suggs. Your bench, Anton Watson, Aaron Cook, Julian Strother, Umar Bala was off the bench too, Dom Harris, etc. on that team. Very different rosters. 16-17 was huge. 4 bigs, all playing rotation minutes, all 10-plus minutes per game. Huge roster, really utilized down low scoring. The 2020-21 team, obviously Drew Timme was the leading scorer, and they facilitated through him a lot, but it was more spaced out, more, had a stretch 4 playing the power forward and Corey Kispert as opposed to more of a low post threat and Jonathan Williams, just very different teams. I think that the 2020-21 team would struggle defensively. They'd struggle to guard Drew Timme. They'd struggle to guard Jonathan Williams. They'd struggle with Zach Collins' floor spacing ability. But I think that their offense is so good and so dynamic that I have a hard time seeing them not win. I think it's going to be like an 80-67 type of score, maybe bump it up 5 each, 85-72, 85-78 maybe. But I think that I'm taking that 2020-21 team. If they played 10 times, I think it's maybe like 6-4. Like I think these two teams are fairly close, but I think I would lean with the 2020-21 team over the 16-17 team. Again, they're very different. It's hard to see how those games would play out. Combining the roster is an absolute nightmare. I did the best that I could, but you're leaving off some great players. Here's the starting lineup. I'm taking 3 guys from the 2020-21 team and 2 from the 16-17 team. From 2020-21, I'm taking Drew Timme at the 5. I'm taking Corey Kispert, but I'm moving him down to the 3. And I'm taking Jalen Suggs at the 1. From 16-17, give me Jonathan Williams at the 4. Give me Nigel Williams-Goss at the 2. At the 1, you're starting your 2 guards in Suggs and Williams-Goss. Off the bench, Shem, which is incredible to have him coming off the bench as your backup center behind Drew Timme. Give me Joel Ajayi as well. He's super versatile. Jackknife, can play 2-3, could play a little bit of 1-2 if you needed him to. So he's really versatile to come off the bench. He's just like a super sized jumbo version of Silas Melson, who was on that 16-17 team. Give me Zach Collins as the 4th big. My goodness. And give me Andrew Nembhard as well. It was tough between Nembhard and Josh Perkins. One of those 2 guys had to get left off. But if I'm taking Williams-Goss and Nembhard, I just think Perk would be a little redundant. Very good player. Incredible player. You're combining 2 teams that went to the national championship. Some great players are going to get left off. If you had 9, You're taking Perk as your ninth guy, clearly. You're still leaving off some great players, even in that situation. You're still leaving off Anton Watson. You're still leaving off Silas Melson. You're still leaving off Aaron Cook. Like, these teams are just freaking loaded, and that's why they went to the back-to-back national, or that's why they each went to a national championship. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Folks, thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to listen to this podcast about Gonzaga basketball. We got some more coming up later this week. We'll talk Anton Watson ahead of the draft. We'll talk about him after the draft rolls around. We'll keep you up to date on what's going on with recruiting as we continue to get more updates on that. We'll continue to keep you up to date on pro Zags, things going on there. Rasir Bolton signed a new contract. We'll talk more about that later in this week as well. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.